All right. Hey, everyone. Yes, it is recording. Welcome to Informed Dissent, a news podcast that brings you dispatches from the gender culture war. I am Ben Appel, and I'm here with Lisa Sellen Davis, Eliza Mondegreen, Jamie Reed, and Corey Cohn. This week we are going, well, we're all in different places this week, kind of, it looks like. I'm in my usual, I'm in New York. Corey looks like he's home as well. Jamie, I've learned where are you, Jamie?
I'm in the LaGuardia airport.
So that's a real background. Planes taxiing.
Yeah.
Eliza, and you're coming home okay, you're coming home from Florida. Where's Eliza?
I'm in the south of France.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah. Um, yeah, cheap flights, cheap hotel, and it's warm.
That's
So,
amazing.
yeah, pretty happy to be here.
Jet setter. And where's
Yeah.
Lisa?
I am in a hotel in Asbury Park, New Jersey.
Amazing. I really
Mhm.
love your background, Lisa. It's doing something for me right
It's a
now.
Oh,
little, they're just blinds, right? But it does look a little trippy.
yes, there is they would not let me check out late, so I told them, well, I'm going to have to record a podcast where I say unpopular things in your public lobby, but that did not convince them to let me stay in the room longer. So I'm in the trippy
Okay.
lobby.
Okay.
All right. Well, today we're going to talk about, yeah, obviously, there's a lot that's happened. Trump's back, inauguration, executive orders, Oscar nominations. What else is going on? There's just some different things. Hannah Barnes, the author of Time to Think, which is an amazing book. So if you haven't read it, please do, because it's about the scandal at the GIDS clinic, or JIDS, I guess. It's gender identity, but I say GIDS for some reason, at the Tavistock Clinic in the UK, and how that scandal unfolded and eventually closed. Well, I think she gets to that perhaps in her updated edition. Regardless, it's a great book. Read it. She has some great reporting in the New Statesman about a parliamentary committee hearing on the safety and efficacy of puberty blockers for gender distressed kids. And she has some really good reporting. So we're going to try to talk about that. But I
Hmm.
think we're going to start with the executive order because and Trump, and that, it's a big, big, big deal for what's going on. So does anybody want to start on that topic? Eliza has written about this for Unheard, so check that out. Lisa for Broadview, they have some great pieces there. So who wants to start?
I think we should start with the title of it because it's worth kind of excavating the particular focus on women and some of the irony around their focus on women, considering some of the other objectives of the Trump administration. So the name of the executive order is Defending Women from Gender Ideology Extremism and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. What if we start with, Corey is so good at explaining gender ideology.
Hmm.
So I wonder if Corey wants to talk about how that term is understood by folks like us and probably the writers of this executive order.
Of gender ideology.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's gender ideology extremism.
that's
So I
true.
guess this opens the possibility that there's gender ideology moderation.
Right.
Oh,
So personally, I'm not a big fan of the title. I probably would have called it something like Executive Order Recognizing Sex as an Unchangeable Biological Reality if I
Hmm.
were writing it, but you know how that goes.
Mhm. Well, the helpful thing is it does have in the definition, and there is just gender ideology in the text, which is good, and
Yeah.
it does really seem to align with Corey's with the brilliant definition that Corey had last week. Is there anything that you disagree with in their draft, Corey?
Um, I don't. Let me take another look at it. So I'll just read it here. Gender ideology replaces the biological category of sex with an ever-shifting concept of self-assessed gender identity permitting the false claim that males can identify as and thus become women and vice versa, and requiring all institutions of society to regard this false claim as true. Yeah, I guess that's pretty similar to the definition that I used at the school board committee meeting. The I think this is pretty useful. This idea that gender identity is a replacement for sex. So calling it gender identity ideology or gender ideology. The only thing that I would say is there's maybe a little bit of hyperbole in here that's kind of padding that you could strip out. Just the idea that you could use some other concept as a substitute for sex is just gender ideology. So I don't know. I'm being too much of a perfectionist, but I wouldn't call it radical gender ideology just because it leaves open an idea that there's moderate gender ideology. It's just gender ideology.
It does, and it gets people's backs up even just a little bit more. Not that this was going to go
Yeah.
over well, but it kind of, you can hear Tucker Carlson saying it, right?
Right, and that's the litmus test for liberals is would it come out of Tucker Carlson's mouth? And I think
Yeah, and we could keep it simpler.
well, I think that also is part of what's so most of this seems reasonable to me, and as I wrote, and I think Eliza touched on too, I mean, what's expressed here is reality and ideas that feminists have been talking about since the 70s. And if it weren't for that bit of incendiary language or the fact that it touches on what have become Republican talking points, this should not be controversial, most of it. But because of where it came from, and because it did not take care to try to calm liberals down, right? It's not intended to get people on board who were on the fence, or it came out just after that New York Times poll that showed 79% of Americans don't want males in female sports, and even something like 68% of Democrats. These are actually pretty mainstream views now that people understand what they were being asked to support. But this isn't written to make those people feel safe sticking up for it.
No, this is definitely a no compromises document. There's no middle ground. But to be fair,
is there a
with
middle ground even available? No, it either, I mean,
no, it's a binary, amusingly.
correct.
Either sex is real or it's a self-determined revelation. There's not an intermediate.
And I don't know that you could word salad that to make it feel good for liberals, except maybe a little bit of the radical language could have been expunged.
Well, I guess I would object to saying that making it more palatable for those 69% of Democrats is about word salad. I think there are, if you look at the executive order, the Biden executive order that it's essentially undoing, that took care to say, look, these, gender nonconforming people are at greater risk for violence, et cetera, which turns out to be true. And although, of course, it was way too far in the other direction and instilled this, forcing us to recognize our subjective sense of self over objective reality, and no, it did not. It was not reaching out to, super conservative Republicans when Biden did that. That was just the same heavy-handedness. But that thing was all nuance. It was It was all complexity. It was all wiggle room. And we don't want that. We don't want policy based on shape shifting, right? But I know when I wrote it up, and I'm curious if Eliza, I'd like to hear right after this what the reactions to Eliza's write up were. Just people writing about, yes, sex is binary, but there there are the tiny exceptions, which whatever, ovotestes, complete androgen insensitivity syndrome, or
But they're not trans.
they're not. No, but there are those, there's Castor Semenya, there's 5-ARD in which you are assigned a sex and it turns out to be wrong. But then you should be then you realize you're the opposite sex. I don't know. How do you accommodate the people who wanted a little more wiggle room? And Eliza, did you hear back from people also who are saying it's not actually feminist enough, it's not actually liberal enough?
I didn't hear that, but I have to admit that I don't read the comments on Unheard ever. So it's just when I posted it on Substack. No, but you got some really interesting comments on your piece that you wanted to talk about. So some things that are maybe worth thinking about it, even if there's not a great way to solve them.
Well, one of the comments was about them using fetal personhood, and I can't find that in there.
It's because they're talking about sex at conception.
Oh, not fetal personhood, sex at conception.
So the idea is that it's
I
a kind
think
of
they're
a Trojan
saying it's
horse.
right, that it could become that slippery slope into fetal personhood because they're saying it begins at conception.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to find it.
And this led to some of the dumbest takes on the internet this week, which was, oh, Trump just declared every man in the country trans because of the crazy idea that all embryos start out as female.
Can we dispel that?
Which is not technically true, right? It's that if you are not virilized, you will continue in the female direction. It's not that everyone starts out female. Is that
right? There's the pathway is set, and it is about virilization and development, and it doesn't mean that everybody starts out female. It means that virilization in the womb changes the fetus, but it doesn't make female fetuses into male fetuses, for example.
Right.
So the order says female means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell, even though you could be female and not be producing that cell. Male means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the small reproductive cell. So they're talking about gametes, large, immobile, and small mobile gametes. But your sex is determined at conception, is it not? When the sperm,
it is.
When the gametes meet and have fun.
Because it's in the genetic coding, correct? And then it's like
yes.
the SRY gene that interacts with, I'm not really sure, maybe the virilization or so on, but whatever happens, that there is a gene that is encoded that determines whether it will be XX or XY. Am I right? At conception, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a tiny little assigner in the womb that they're drafting here.
Let me see which way I want to go. But
yeah.
so that's the language that people are worried.
That's the language that some people are worried about.
But that language is technically accurate. See, this is the larger problem of taking offense at neutral, factual language. It's happened in this, when the idea that, and honestly, I think this was part of my liberal feminist training, to be offended by if someone's called me a lady, or even last night when I went to this concert here in Asbury Park. I was among the younger people there, and I'm quite old now. And this man left and he said goodbye. Had not talked to him, but to me and another woman sitting next to me, and he said, "Bye, girls." And I just thought, well, that's just Jersey. It's not meant to be offensive. Of course, it's not accurate because I am an adult human female, but this battle over woman is because people are assigning it qualities and meanings and then reacting to it based on their individual assignment to that word, as opposed to sex is just which part you are to make more of you, right? And we're getting all in a tizzy because we have our own personal definitions of these words that allow us to react, to get offended, to get upset. When if we just, what this order is trying to do is get us back to a common definition, which we need in order to make policy. Don't you guys think?
Yeah. Well, that's
Wow.
that's a good line in it, Lisa, is that it says, a good couple lines, the erasure of sex in language and policy has a corrosive impact, not just on women, but on the validity of the entire American system. Basing federal policy on truth is critical to scientific inquiry, public safety, morale, and trust in government itself. So I think that kind of touches on what you were saying there. But also, it's interesting, this kind of idea of fetal, what is it, personhood. People talked about, and a lot of feminists have said, like, well, when Democrats talk about, defending women, you can't defend what you can't define. And how are you going to protect women's rights, or a woman's right to choose, if you can't even say you can't even admit that it's women who are the ones that are carrying pregnancies, that are getting pregnant, that are choosing or may need to choose abortion, or to carry their child, their fetus to term. And this is like a kind of a down the line ripple effect of that. You start there, and then when we're trying to restore some kind of semblance of, oh my gosh, well, look, it's fetalhood and, or, personhood, and this is going to affect it. And it's like, well, this is not this isn't what started it. It started when you tried to separate sex from material reality. You tried to separate woman from the fact that women are the only sex that birth humans, right? There's so many consequences that continue to unfold, that where you go down this, suddenly, and you think this is just one more step towards going completely, Wesley Yang talks
Well,
about over the waterfall, or, but this is just that one more step towards, and it all began back there.
like everything's different right now, at least in the United States, right?
Say more. Corey, say more about that. What do you mean everything's different? Besides the dude, Mr. Comb Over at the helm.
There's a very strong signal sent that whether you want to call it radical gender ideology or just gender ideology is not going to be tolerated any longer in the federal institutions. And there's also a lot of states that are pushing back on it now. This is the pendulum is swinging backwards, or coming back.
It reminded me of a map I had when I worked in the gender center, where I was starting to shade in states that were recognizing the X on identification. And I remember back then thinking, oh, someday this X will be, like
Universal.
accepted, yeah, universally. And now knowing that that's being rolled back, I think it's really important. I think it's really a powerful step. But I think what we don't know yet is how that's going to happen. So if you already have a passport, are you going to have to get a new one, or does it just expire in 10 years? And you have it the way it is now. I think there are legitimate questions about how this is put into place, but the framework is there to say that we should not be giving human beings an X on their passport anymore.
Mhm.
Can I read the couple of comments that were concerned?
Yeah.
Okay, this one is from friend of the pod, Jennifer Block, whether she knows she's friend of the pod or not, who writes about these issues. I think the thing liberals still will want is to allow for some to live as the other gender, which is so funny because this executive order is about getting rid of that word. What becomes of the thousands of kids who have been medically ushered through the other puberty and adults who've had surgery? There's cruelty, it seems, in outing them on their IDs. Is there a way to acknowledge sex, protect women, and allow for the reality that some people are trans, not only in identity / belief, but because medicine altered them? Let's talk about that
I,
one first. What do you guys think?
I still see the cruelty in the reverse. I think it's crueler to have a child believe that their sex has magically changed and that they are not aligned with their sex and that it ever could have changed. And so I don't know if cruelty, I don't know that we can legislate or require how people react to seeing someone with a different marker on the ID than what they believe the person in front of them should appear as. But isn't that, in essence, asking us to start being open to the gender nonconformity that we all want to see in the world? That gender nonconforming people are accepted?
That some people want to see in the world.
Am I not, am I in a minority that I want to see gender nonconforming
No,
people
I'm guessing
accepted?
that we all want to see that, but Corey's talking a little more broadly.
You might be, we might, for us here, we might be in the minority. I believe we probably are.
I guess it brings up something else that is hard because to talk about. But you know, one of the problems, for instance, when Ben and Corey and I were at the school board meeting, and this man stood up, I mean, he's very clearly a man, right? And said, what do you want me to use the men's bathroom? And we all, and Corey said, no, I do it and it's uncomfortable and that's okay. But the thing is that in my, I don't want to talk about my kid too much, but it really for really masculine girls and butch women who are just really came out like that, they are always told they're in the wrong bathroom. And it evokes this reaction in people who feel like they're being asked to do what we were being asked to do at the school board, which is deny what they see with their eyes. And they're
Mm.
wrong. They're wrong that this person does belong there. But,
Mm.
When I interviewed Stella O'Malley for my book, who was a kid like mine, who was a highly gender nonconforming child who started to conform more at puberty, though, I wouldn't say she's particularly feminine. She told me that now she thinks it is better to encourage kids to conform as much as possible. Not necessarily with the kind of normalizing therapy of the 1970s that shamed kids, into complying with stereotypes, but just try to get them to fit in a little bit more and not go out of our way to accommodate them because it's a burden on society and hard on the kids. And I thought it was fascinating that that's where she's landed.
That was kind of, well, I mean, it is fascinating, and I think that was kind of Kenneth Zucker's, approach as well,
Mhm.
Um, but it's interesting because there was this guy this a number of years ago, and my story, very very feminine kid, and then I was bullied in my coping mechanism was to defeminize. So I went in the opposite direction. I did conform. Um, and it was an act, it was a very conscious act that I did. And I remember telling this to a guy, this Mormon guy who had recently come out after many years, and we were talking, and we were just talking about, being gay and religious communities, etc. And I told him about my experience, and he said, "I don't see what's wrong with that. I don't see what's so bad about that." And he said, "You were just that was you were smart. You were surviving. Like you were adapting to society, and you were thriving, and you made it, in this world, and you are here, and this is where you are." And it was such an interesting take. I had never really necessarily gotten that response before. So there is some, I don't know, there's a lot to think about there. I've heard this from other people as well, that um, y- you know, back to Jennifer about this kindness thing. Isn't that how we got into this? I mean, isn't that how, worrying about what's cruel? Isn't that how it began? Corey?
I gotta run.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's
Okay,
a
Oh,
Corey has
short
to.
it's a
okay.
short day for me today.
Okay. All right.
So
Bye, Corey.
I
Sorry, Corey.
apologize.
Thank you for
We,
being here.
we will miss you.
We
I'll miss
will.
you too. Have fun in Jersey and France and New
In
York.
Airport.
LaGuardia.
LaGuardia.
Then I want to ask a question though about what you just said.
Uh-huh.
So
Yeah, I wanted to.
don't you lose something? Okay, so there's a
Hmm.
part of the gay and lesbian community that there are natural attractions for some of us who are femme to
Hmm.
butch women. And there are, but I mean, there are like, there's like things that like we pick up on and that is part of our community and part of our wholeness and our sexuality that like
Hmm.
I think does get missed when we ask people to mute or quiet those expressions.
Well, that's actually a good point. So that's one thing, is our authentic kind of the perhaps way we attract mates and so on. But I said this in the school board meeting, I think, but I wrote about this years ago, and because I kind of realized this, that how much creativity was uh not attached, but kind of well, it was really what it was, stifled after I did all of this conforming. I kind of became very, like you said, muted, but it really prohibited me from enjoying and expressing myself in all of the ways that I previously had, because of that fear of how I would appear to others and how it would come across to others, whether it was singing or acting,
Mhm.
or even, like I said, I was an athlete as well. So the way I ran, it really did restrict free expression. So there's something to be said for that, a lot to be said for that.
But isn't the pursuit of your authentic self kind of part of what we critique about this gender ideology narrative? And it's so individualistic, it's so Western, it's so temporally and culturally specific to this time.
Yes, the clothing, the present, some of that is, but don't you feel like some of that masculinity in women or femininity in men? I think you said though, Lisa, doesn't it just like born with the backwards baseball cap?
Well, it's interesting, because what we're talking about here
Born
is
this way.
what we're talking about, Lisa, you're saying this is such a Western thing. What have other cultures done? They've
Mhm.
That's
created
right.
third gender. They've
That's
created,
right.
so there's these third genders where, folks are, kind of classified as not of, there are still of their sex, but they're of a different gender or class of that sex.
That's
And
right.
that's what they do. So everybody conforms, and if
Mhm.
you don't, you are fafafine or whatnot.
Well,
And
there's this.
another thing in the New York Times this week was that Thailand legalized same-sex marriage, and there was
Mhm.
a
Yeah,
whole bunch of photographs in there. And if you just look at this other culture's presentation, that butch femme dynamic is just like bam, right there in these photographs. Like you
Right.
just see this dynamic
Yeah.
across cultures too.
Hmm.
Well, in a lot of Asia, they have a category called a tomboy, and there's no distinction between butch women and trans men. And they even have in the Philippines, they have tomboy beauty contests, which I wrote about in my. So there is an actual elevation of female masculinity. And in Afghanistan, they have this category called the Basha Posh. And what's fascinating about them, and I think I told you guys once that I so my one of my great joys in life is talking to Uber and Lyft drivers. And I was in Virginia for a book event, and my Uber driver was a woman from Afghanistan, a refugee, and she said she had been to Bosha Pasha. And they are not, they're not born that way. They are assigned to be about for a variety of reasons, but almost usually on some level because the family has not had a son, which is a big problem in Afghanistan. And some of them just want to stay masculine. They're supposed to only do it till puberty, but some of them are just like, nope. And now that's obviously because it sucks to be a woman in Afghanistan and they don't want to give up their privileges, but they also seem to grow quite comfortable in that masculine role. And I think there's a little bit of mystery in it, which I'm comfortable with and interested in. And I'm willing to question my own choices on my own stance about it. But yes, many cultures have a category for these people who emerge as gender nonconforming. And usually the category is also rooted in their intolerance of homosexuality on some level.
And it seems like, so we have this very confected idea of an authentic self that we're all supposed to be pursuing in Western cultures. And what Ben is talking about kind of losing in the process of, that self-surveilling and trying to put on a really masculine presentation is not an authentic self so much as just like a naturalness of like gesture and express. Like it seems like so much more basic and like not something that, and like I think we would all say, ideally it wouldn't have been something that you would have ever become self-conscious about, and it would have just kept flowing, right? And instead it became something that you became self-conscious about, and then that naturalness of gestures and expressions and movements was kind of checked.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I've said before too that as I got older and when I, got sober and started to get better and got mental health help and so on, I started kind of trying to reconnect with that person, and experimented with, bronzer and, makeup, and I would get manicures and pedicures, just doing those effeminate things that, and, coloring my hair and so on. And eventually, and it became performative for me. It became something that just seemed, that ultimately, my intellect, my creativity wasn't necessarily so stifled by that. It was more like the creativity and intellect that I discovered on the other side of that, for lack of a better word, trauma. Once I got past that and walked through that, there was just a new, a world of intellect, creativity there for me to harness, I suppose, in if I could. And
Yeah.
so eventually I thought that's not who I am. That does not make me who I am. This mascara, this whatever it is, my need to project something to other people, who I am, is what I think, what I say, how I treat other people, my ideas, and so on, right?
Yeah.
Did Jennifer Block have anything more kind of to add about the pathway to that? Is she
No,
talking about like a grandfathering in IDs? People have already changed IDs.
I mean, it was just a comment, which she had texted to me, and then I said, put it on my Substack
Yeah.
so people can respond. Um, but I guess the question is, I guess one question maybe people who come from liberal feminist world and who appreciate this executive order might have is, we can't legislate what we're talking about, which is we accept the exceptions to the kind of rules. Both these intersex categories, they're so rare, and I think it's impossible to legislate based on that. But and we accept this kind of other definition of gender, which is about like masculinity and femininity, and stereotypes and assumptions based on sex. And I think that Biden's executive order was all about legislating the wiggle room and the nuance, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it leaks into everything, and it's trying to control your thoughts and beliefs and your language, and it forced us to deny reality in order to do so. But the worry then is, well, look, we are all in agreement that some kids are born this way, and by that we mean they emerge as gender nonconforming. And where are they in this, right? Are we going to go all the way over to the other side of the pendulum? And I've talked about this before, but if you look back at one of the first bills, I can't remember if it was a bathroom bill or an early attempt at a ban, but it was in North Carolina, and it said, school personnel shall notify parents if a child exhibits gender nonconforming behavior. And I just had a complete no, I don't. This was the beginning of we've got to deal with this. Liberals have to deal with this. Like, this is scary to me. And we don't know, we don't know how much the right has listened to us. Certainly we know that they've invited us into their spaces and that they've been interested in collaborating. And we know that this executive order had a variety of input. We're not at liberty to say, but we know that this was not drafted entirely by far right people. Okay. So we know that they listen to us on the things we agree on, but we don't know how much they've been affected by us. We've heard that they've grown much more tolerant of gender nonconformity and homosexuality by communing with us, but we don't have any evidence of that. And that is, we certainly tried to alert Democrats and liberals. We tried to change the media narratives, like all of us, right? We've worked on this for years because we feared what would happen if the right took over. And now they have. And to me, the executive order isn't particularly frightening. Even the things that the people called out on my Substack of beware of this, kind of like, no, it's okay to say sex at conception because it is true. It's okay. My tagline has always been destigmatize the truth throughout this, but we don't know where they're going, and we don't know if we're allowed on the ride or not.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to what Jennifer Block was saying about kind of the cruelty, and I think Jamie, you were mentioning just I think you were the one who was talking about the uncertainty around like the X passport and like what happens. Like the executive order doesn't lay that out. And one of the things that I wish had been taken more into consideration, my research during grad school, my research assistantship during grad school was in the area of radicalization. I think that that's a really appropriate framework to understand online trans communities, is a radicalization framework. And I think that just more clear information, and I know that that'll come out of a rulemaking process, but as much information as possible up front about how this was going to work might help talk some people off the ledge, because what I was seeing all week on Twitter, on Facebook, on Reddit, and when I, would look at my own friends who do identify as trans, who are not gender critical, it was just a ton of, panic. And this is exactly what happened in Nazi Germany. And they're going to be making lists, and then they're going to be concentration camps, and people thinking that they're going to be like dragged out into the street and have to choose if they're going to go to prison or detransit, like just completely like gaga stuff that is genuinely terrifying people. And there has to be some way, like, you can't get to all of those people. Some of them are so disconnected from reality, but just more information about even how something like the passports, what if you have an ex-passport now, would help a lot, because that seems to be an on-ramp for people to be like, okay, should I change my documents now? Should I change it back? Should I never leave the United States again? Like, is somebody going to come and take it away? There were just so many questions that were kind of escalating into a panic. And it is not the responsibility of people who didn't go down the rabbit hole to follow everybody else down there, but it's just,
Well,
there are
that's
some,
part of, yeah. Shouldn't some of that messaging, like, calm down, we're going to figure this out, come from GLAAD and HRC and
it should
Lambda
come from those
Legal?
organizations, and it's
Shouldn't
not
they
going
be
to.
saying things like, your document right now might not necessarily change, but there are going to be real ID requirements in the United States soon, and that is a federal requirement, and your ID
Yeah.
probably needs to match your sex. And
Yeah.
then the next thing is talking to people about how that still, you can be resilient in that.
Mhm.
Resilience.
Yeah, that is
My
exactly
God,
the role.
imagine that.
I mean,
That's not good for fundraising. I
No, it's
mean,
not.
Right.
you're fine. You're going to be okay. Give me $100. Sorry. No.
No, I think I'll keep my
are
money, I
fine
guess.
and you are going to be okay. And like,
Good point. It's a good
Yeah,
Also,
but
point.
you're both exactly right. Jamie, you're exactly right that it should be those organizations. They should be the adults in the room that these young people trust, who are saying, this stuff is not happening. Like, this is not 1933. Like, this is just about reflecting sex on identification. We're not exactly sure how it will be implemented. We're going to find out. And like, it's an ID card.
but those
now
people
the
have been,
prisoner situation different.
Yes,
They are probably moving.
they are probably moving. Apparently, the New York Times reports today that 15% of female
I
prisoners
saw
in federal
that
prison are men.
are trans. Yeah, are men. And there were 750 trans men in male prison. Is that the number?
That
I will pull
that
it up.
is, I've been wondering how often women decide to be housed over there. But okay.
I
It
don't
was very
think,
interesting to get numbers, maybe for the first time, about federal prison population and trans identification.
I'm trying to look
Can
that up.
I,
That's
yeah, look that up.
fascinating.
That is fascinating. I would definitely want to come back to that in a second while you guys are looking that up. So when we were talking about there's a value to conformity, there's a value to gender nonconformity, allowing people to be who they are. Okay, so if we're taking that approach, and gender dysphoria is something that is real, if people experience some kind of distress, if we're isn't encouraging more conformity, isn't that how the really naturally even profoundly inherently gender nonconforming people started to experience distress and see?
Oh, it's a totally Western experience. I mean, there's hardly any gender dysphoria especially in countries that have those categories.
So
If you
we
look
are
at,
trying to do yeah, we're trying to do something completely different. Go ahead.
if you look at
Mhm.
Paul Vasey's work,
Hmm.
he says on the Fafafine and the Mushes of Mexico and some other groups like that, he said he found almost no gender dysphoria in those groups. And he also talks about historically, I mean, when you hear activists saying trans people have always existed, which is not true, because that's a very modern way to understand these kinds of people. What they mean is that there have always been these gender nonconforming people, as far as we can tell. And
Mhm.
especially for the feminine males,
And Lisa,
they,
sorry, could we even use the phrase sex nonconforming? Sex
yeah,
nonconforming
we could
people have
decide
always existed. Is that
sex. Yes.
okay?
Should we become
I'm just, yeah,
purists?
I'm just,
Yeah. No, we should be using, we should say sex roles and say, I mean, the complication for Americans is that it's also the name for erotic acts, and we're Puritans. And we were going to talk about purity in late today too, but what I was just going to say is that according to Vasey, these sex nonconforming males, you know, historically tended to be very creative, very dramatic, very artistic, and that was just a known entity in a lot of cultures, and it seems like the place where it wasn't known was in Christianity. It seems like that a big part was that when Christianity became more prevalent, it was very narrow in its what it allowed for men and women to be. And that's one take based on the book The Weirdest People in the World that I have been reading for 17 million years, but
Well,
which I highly recommend.
another take, Lisa, and theory about that is, when I was at Columbia, I took the historian George Chauncey's, his course was called U.S. Lesbian and Gay History, and his theory, he wrote Gay New York, and he's great. Um, his theory is that, and he backs this up with a lot of evidence. So this is kind of how my understanding formed of it post World War II. So there during that time, this World War, both World Wars were so destabilizing on a global scale, but especially after World War II, and gender role, sex roles were very uh, women were in the workforce, they
Mhm.
were, taking over at home, the men were off fighting. And when we won that war, thankfully, and the men came home, there was this tension, this conflict of people reassuming these sex roles. And
Mhm.
if you look at the advertisements at that time, these nuclear families, this kind of pushing this propagandistic picture of what the family and what men are supposed to look like and what women are supposed to look like and how women are supposed to behave and how men are supposed to behave. And during that time, there was this huge push of really engendering sex roles and making this a new commitment to stabilize the world, but also the country. It became kind of attached to our American identity. And there's the Cold War that followed. Well, what was a huge part of the Cold War? It was, fighting communism, but gay people specifically in the Lavender Scare were, expunged from the government and purged from the government
Mhm.
because of their anti-Americanism, because it was kind of the seen as this vice, this deviance, where they were more susceptible to being blackmailed by communists. They were more, so that prior, it's not like everybody we were living like, let's say there were Fafa Fine and so on, but it was a different, according to Chauncey and other historians, a really different kind of configuration in the beginning of the 20th
Mhm.
century, late 19th century, where there were fairies and there were queers and there were normal folks, but it really was divided by presentation, essentially. There was this uh, uh, and a lot of times profoundly sex nonconforming males, for example, would have sex with quote unquote normal men. They called them trade, So there were, and so it's really evolved and changed as over time. I mean, there's been huge impacts on political organizing according to identity and
Mhm.
establishing, it's part of that argument between social construction and so on. And people think, and that's why there's huge backlash among the quote unquote queer community and in these spaces and in academia, is because they they think and speculate that, organizing as a gay identity, heterosexualizes and creates everything more binary and detaches people from their kind of natural bisexuality, um, and makes people conform more so as not to appear or seem gay, which is bad. Uh, I mean, so
By the way, there's a detailed account of that in the book Housewife that I wrote. So I'm gonna give 5 copies of that away to our next to any of our the next 5 whatever we have. Do we have a founding membership? If
yes,
we
we
have
have.
a founding,
I
I'll give
think
a
we do.
okay. I'm gonna give
Good.
if anyone who wants to learn more about that, I'll send you the book if you
Uh,
for a founding membership because I
Amazing.
wrote a lot about that.
I did
And
get the numbers from the New York Times on just on
mhm,
prisons really quickly. So, according to the Times, there are about 1,500 federal prisoners who are transgender women, but they represent an outsized portion of federal inmates, especially among female prisoners. 15% of women in prison are transgender. There are 750 transgender men out of about 144,000 male prisoners.
But are those transgender men in men's prisons, or are those just there? That's the number of females
Right.
who've
Well,
transitioned
I
in
mean,
the
by the
system.
sentence, I mean, they're saying there are 750 transgender men out of about
yeah,
144,000
just
male prisoners. So it sounds like to me they are transitioned and they're living as male in the male prison system.
We would need clarification on that though, and they should clarify that. The time should.
We'll get that. We'll get that
Yeah.
for our
And then the
listeners and watchers.
15%, did it say they're all housed in women's prisons?
Yeah, again, yes, I think that they're saying that they are in the women's prison estate, I think is the
mhm,
word that's used for the prison estate. The other thing that was interesting in this paper, well, in this piece though today, is they're trying to say, why are there so many trans women in prison, period? Like what? Like, and
mhm.
they said, experts point to studies that show transgender people are more likely to attract the attention of law enforcement, explaining the reason, and they are more likely to face family rejection or economic hardship. Nowhere is in there mentions that they also potentially, and why they're in there is often crimes related to sex.
Yeah.
I do recall a study from many decades ago, a follow-up study in maybe in Sweden that said that women who took testosterone had increased kind of criminal behavior after going on testosterone. I don't know about it doesn't seem like estrogen decreases your criminal proclivities.
Yeah, this is one of those things where at some point activists are going to have to decide if trans identified males are more likely to commit crimes or if men are taking advantage of prison policies to get into a cushier setup because it's striking. Like, you keep saying they're 1% of the population, but they're 15% of female federal prisoners. It's also, I would be really interested if somebody did a study that was just a breakdown of like, okay, what kinds of crimes are they in for? So that the New York Times would have more than just like, oh, maybe they attract the attention of law enforcement. Well, they're definitely not doing anything illegal.
Right.
Well, it'd be that's we'd need to know their sex then. So need to know
Right.
the sex of everyone in prison. So good thing we have this executive order. I think that's a great idea, Eliza, to do a study.
And then we don't have to
Uh,
speculate.
Well, I mean, but we do have the data that shows that it tracks across, trans identification, that violence,
Yeah.
sexual violence and violence is proportionate in, the general male population and then in the trans identifying male population. It crosses that border. There's no difference there.
And then a lot of experience from people working in mental health services that paraphilias tend to cluster, of
Well,
which
and all right,
I consider, yeah.
and also, if I could be wrong about this, so I need to fact check, but I think I've read that the proportion of sex offenders and for sex violence offenders, the proportion that trans identifying males outnumber the males who have committed sex crimes that are not trans identifying in prison. If I'm correct, I think that might be right, meaning that, per capita or whatever, more trans identifying males commit those crimes than males who do
Eliza,
not.
will you say more about the paraphilias clustering? Because I think
Yeah.
Mm,
some people won't know what a paraphilia is. Maybe,
sure.
maybe. And what do you mean by they tend like unpack that?
Yeah, so this has been an observation of clinicians and researchers that paraphilias, so I think a paraphilia is like an extreme, unusual sexual interest. And so pedophilia is a paraphilia, autogynephilia is a paraphilia, foot fetishists, like they're all like people who want to have sex with corpses, all like it really runs the gamut of every depraved thing you can think of. There's a name for that. And what researchers and clinicians have observed is that if especially, a male patient has one of these, he's much more likely to have other paraphilias as well. So it's hard not to think of some of the men who identify as women but also identify as little girls. Um, yeah,
Adult diaper babies,
adult diaper, adult babies,
adult
just
baby,
adult babies. We
adult
could,
babies,
of course, the
adult.
diaper is the first thing that you think of, but we don't have to say it.
Are there? I'm
Name
sorry, a diaper baby. No, the adult baby diaper
adult babies.
wearers. That's
So
a
I
thing.
love that
Yeah.
Lisa's in a lobby at a hotel and the phrase adult diaper baby.
Lisa's like, I told you,
came
lobbyists,
up.
lobby.
I told you I was going to talk about these things. Here goes the adult diaper
I
baby.
kind of forgot that I was in public.
Yeah, you were like, we were like very constrained at the beginning, very restrained, I
Uh-huh.
guess. Kind of loosening up here with the adult babies.
Okay, can I say though, with this New York Times piece and what Eliza just said, the New York Times only really recognized and talked about that this could harm the trans women in prison. And there was not an iota or a mention of the women who have been in prison who have been negatively impacted by this policy.
Yeah.
There was nothing about the sexual assaults, rapes,
Harassment, pregnancies.
none of it. Yeah.
That's
Yep.
inexcusable. That's just
That
inexcusable.
they
Go ahead.
also, when they wrote up their own poll about people who supported Trump's policies, but not Trump, they never mention the trans stuff. They mention all these other issues, and they just ignore the 79% of people who don't want biological males in women's sports in their own poll.
Well, and also in their own poll, it showed, I believe this was the New York Times and then the Ipsos poll or whatever. It showed that the number one reason why swing voters chose Trump was because of the Democrats or Kamala's supposed push or overreach when it came to cultural issues, including transgender issues. That it was like 28% of swing voters went the other way because of that, according to that poll.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows how far it would have gone if Trump put out an adult diaper baby ad.
Well, and also
It might have gone.
and who knows how many people chose not to vote because they couldn't vote for Trump,
Correct.
but they couldn't vote for the
Right.
Democratic Party because of this issue.
Like two of
Me.
us in
Like
this
me.
conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
Should we?
can we circle back then to this issue of how do you support the policy when you don't support the politician? Because this kind of comes back to this recurring issue of purity. And so, we are not at liberty to mention, but we know that there was a diverse group working in different drafts of this executive order. And I'm not participating very much on online discourses these days, but I only just learned the term ultra Corey said something about it, and I said, I actually don't know what it means. And, so it's a particular kind of gender critical. I don't even think these women are necessarily feminists, but gender critical person who wants nothing to do with any kind of transsexual, even if you regret and maybe, I guess if you detransition. And they, for instance, reject all of us because of our affiliation with Corey. They reject Corey, or that we are willing to work in a diverse coalition, and I find them quite frightening. But one of them, they have a kind of a leader, princess named Kelly J. Keene,
Kelly J. Keene.
and she, who kind of looks like Marilyn Monroe. She's kind of an interesting character.
Posey Parker.
And when someone in, I don't know if I posted it or Maud Marin posted our school board meeting, and she just impugned it because of Corey being there.
And wearing a scarf or
something, I don't know. But I mean, of course, Corey is valuable because of straddling this line of like, we are trying to move the people who are still in it, who are movable anyway. And we're trying to I'm trying to talk to liberals. I don't need to talk to the people who wrote Project 2025 and worked on this executive order. They don't need my input. I'm trying to talk to the people who are letting themselves get hysterical over it. And I said something about on Twitter, about X, whatever, about being confused by these ultras and their need for purity. And Kelly KJK wrote back, it's purity that got us this executive order. And I'm just kind of fascinated by the infighting and what are your motivations? Are you taking any money? Are you, everyone, and I'm not saying that I don't get sucked into this myself, because there are a few people that I just feel like are grifting a little bit, but what do we do about this need for kind of ideological purity, or you can't have any past, or you can't have strayed in any way?
Well, I don't pass the purity test. I mean, I literally worked to transition kids for close to 5 years. I I don't know how we move forward if we don't welcome in those who have made mistakes and taken the wrong path. Don't we have to grow the tent?
I honestly, I think that that sentence, "Purity is what got us this EO, this executive order," is so frightening to me. It's so stark and frightening to me. It is the opposite of what I think. I mean, perhaps I don't know. So no, I do not think that's good. I think that's very bad.
it seems like the opposite of what got us here, but yeah.
I watched Conclave last night at the recommendation, I think, of Ben and our friend Paul.
What is this?
Conclave.
The like Ralph Fiennes
the
movie
Catholic Church movie
about selecting.
Oh, you
new
gotta
pope.
watch it. You gotta watch it, Eliza.
There's a huge twist at the end, though, Eliza.
Oh, you have to watch it. Go ahead, Lisa.
So he gives a Rafe, is it Rafe Fiennes or Ralph Fiennes?
It's Rafe.
Rafe.
Very
He
British.
gives a speech in it about certainty being the enemy of unity and tolerance. Let me see if I can find it. And how they should not let purity get in the way of selecting the next pope. And it was certainty is the great enemy of unity, the deadly enemy of tolerance. If there was only certainty and no doubt, there would be no mystery and therefore no need for faith. And then he goes on to say, we need to allow for a leader who has sinned and repented and learned and continued on. And they get one. Without giving too much away, but I was moved by that. I mean, that doesn't often happen to me when I'm watching a film about Catholics.
Is this a selection of a historical pope or a hypothetical pope or
Hypothetical modern time.
Very hypothetical.
Very
very
hypothetical and
hypothetical.
today.
Is it an adult baby diaper lover?
No.
It is
Gets
not.
selected as
Oh God. No.
It's not. It is not, but we're going to that should be one of our recommendations of the week is
which
Catholics
one?
Is watching Conclave.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Not converting to Catholicism, but if you do that in the next week, please let us know in the comments. Or Judaism, if you convert to anything, or atheism.
But before we move on, I think should we go over really briefly what I think by now everybody knows what the executive order does, and what it doesn't do. But I think there was maybe what it doesn't do. I think that there was confusion about what it means for state policies and laws, and as far as I know, it doesn't do anything when it comes to state law and policy. So there's going to be a conflict there. So what will likely happen is that a lot of this stuff is probably going to have to be decided in the courts. That people will sue, states will sue, people will bring lawsuits, and then this will be argued about. What this does do is it comes to federal agencies, federal employees, and contractors. So that's who it affects, and that's what it affects. And the contractors, I understand, is a big one. Because that was like a big workaround previously where it was just federal agencies and employees or whatever, but contractors were kind of left off the hook or something like that, according to, in terms of past executive orders or rulings. And so including contractors in this is a big one because it makes it cast a broader net. That's what that
But
is.
it does not touch sports yet, and it doesn't touch pediatric medical intervention.
It doesn't
Those
touch
were the two
pediatric
things.
and then
Right.
sports, but so that's the thing because it's like, well, if we're talking about federal agencies, we're talking about enforcement of Title IX, we're talking about, I thought it was private sports clubs, private camps, but publicly funded. That's where this, Lisa, go ahead. Is this where this lawsuits come in or what?
Well, I had been looking at federal funds shall not be used to promote gender ideology. And how many advocacy groups, this is a good research project for somebody, are getting federal funding. The
Huge grants.
The Schools in Transition Guide from 2015 was the ACLU, GLSEN, and the Department of Education, right? So they have contracted out. I mean, I think these advocacy groups have gotten a lot of federal dollars to implement and institutionalize gender identity. And what does it mean for them? And I mean, the other thing is that it evaporates when Trump leaves office. Now, it is entirely possible that he will cryogenically freeze his brain. I just mispronounced that word, and rearrange all the Constitution to remain in office forever. So maybe this will last forever, but if he's unseated in 4 years, it evaporates with him.
Right, this has been a tug of war since the Obama administration. So should probably expect it to continue to be one unless Democrats either don't retake the White House anytime soon or undergo some kind of rethink as the kind of culture shifts on this question. And I'm kind of curious, I felt like people were way less polarized going into Trump's inauguration this time than in 2016. And after this week, I'm not sure that I feel that way anymore. I'm curious what you guys are observing.
Meaning,
Will you
yeah.
say more about how you came to that conclusion, Eliza?
Um, I there's just been it just feels a lot like 2017 in terms of the level of like some genuine and some performative panic.
Well, I can tell you this, different from 2017. I did not go out and buy a whole bunch of safety pins to hand out in
Okay.
the gender clinic and show everybody that I am safe because I'm now wearing this safety pin on because that was definitely a day after the election
Oh
move
my God.
there.
I just realized something like 8 years, like that's why they were safety pins.
Yeah,
Yes, that's
that's what
why
that
people,
was.
yep, that was what that was.
I am safe. I'm wearing a safety
Okay.
pin.
That just took 8 years,
Yeah.
which
I
is the sign of a really strong message.
I feel like we should
No, that's me. That's on me.
our logo should be the unsafety pin.
Right. Well,
Um, okay. So
I,
you didn't buy a safety pin.
no,
Did anybody buy
didn't
stock in
cry,
safety pins just in case? No.
didn't wake up crying. Actually, my
Yep.
16-year-old bought his first stock, spent $20 of his work money to buy stock because he thinks that the Trump economy is going to come roaring something.
good. Good. Look,
Um,
my concern was, in previous months or even years, I was just like, oh my gosh, when it looked like Trump was going to get the nomination again, when he was going to run, my immediate concern was not so much what a second Trump term, what he would do. Um, uh, Although of course that was a concern and what it would be like, but what the less reaction would be and how crazy they would become and so on. And that was my real concern. I was like, God, we need just a normal. I was willing to vote for like a quote unquote normie Republican. Um, so that to deter that. Am I still worried about? I'm kind of still worried about that. Yeah, I'm worried. That's my probably biggest concern because Trump reacts. So it's, that I've said this a million times, but Newton's third law, it's like for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So it's like they play off each other and one pushes ping pongs and they push and push and push and we end up in this crazy place. I do think a lot of the insanity that happened post 2017 or post 2016 is a direct result of Trump and the reaction to Trump specifically. I don't think that I have no idea what their world would be like if Hillary Clinton had won that election. I really don't. And I think that we would be in a different cultural landscape because of there wouldn't be this massive at least as much of a massive reaction and push. And I also secretly think that Hillary Clinton's a turf. But anyway, um, it's getting loud. We should, in Lisa and Jamie have alerted that in their spaces, their public spaces, it's getting kind of loud, and
mhm.
they have to run. So we should probably wind this down. But we thank everybody for listening. Does anybody have any final thoughts about that? We didn't get to the other topics, but that's okay because this was a big one, I think.
We could do our non-gender related
Well, there you go.
recommendation of the week.
Hmm. Go for it.
Yeah, and Benjamin, oh my God, Ben, you should preview your newsletter so that people know what to
Okay.
expect.
Yeah, you can call me Benjamin if you want. So, yeah, so
I
we're
don't
also
know. I'm
doing,
really tired. I'm really jet lagged.
we're doing a newsletter as well, just something extra to do for folks that are subscribing, and we're so grateful for you. So, at once a week, we're going to be putting out a newsletter that just it's not it will have some takes, some big headlines, responses to that, breakdowns, and so on. But then just it'll also be a lot of links to different news coverage and so on regarding this issue in the previous week. So that's what we're going to be putting out once a week. And so yeah, look for that in the next couple days.
Non-gender, Jamie? Coffee?
No coffee. No, I don't know. Take your kids out of school when you feel like it. I took a couple kids with me. I spoke in Orlando to a parents group, and I was like, you know what? They're coming with me. They're going to hang out with me. So it was nice. And the schools can accept my email that says they're my kids. They get to take a day off school sometimes when I want them to. Yeah.
Mine is going to be the guy I saw perform last night, Chuck Prophet. And if you have a chance to see Chuck Prophet live, it's a friggin' joy festival. He's like an old San Francisco rocker and with a very twangy voice. And he just recalls a different era, but he also is just really into an exchange of good vibes. And this is the second time we've seen him. And I'm going to link to his new song, one of his new songs. It's a good day to be alive. He actually just survived a bout with cancer. So it's a great song.
And you seem extra chill today, just
I'm
FYI.
so chill. I'm so chill. Well, also I was on vacation for one night. I also recommend the one night vacation. Never had one before. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Eliza, what about you?
I would say that I spend a lot of time questioning my financial priorities, like why have I never owned a couch? But right now I am in France, and it's like this is like human beings were meant to live in a Mediterranean climate. It's completely clear to me. It's January, it's warm in the sun. Big fan. So I'm working from here for a few days.
Amazing.
I think that's a great idea. Mediterranean climate. That's going to be my retirement goal.
And diet, right?
And, and diet.
No, but I mean
And lifestyle.
Mediterranean diet as
Yeah.
well.
No,
Yeah.
people were meant to live right here.
Right.
It's obvious.
Yeah.
That's all.
Adjacent to the Fertile Crescent.
Hmm.
All right, so we'll see people next week.
Ben,
Oh,
did you have a
Ben.
non-gender world?
Oh my gosh,
Also, I
guys.
really like your hat this week, Ben.
Thank
Oh
you.
yeah, me too.
I would say my last week was the Australian Open. I can't think of anything. I mean, literally, guys, what do? I try, I write and then I read about this stuff and then I watch like reruns of like Friends and Seinfeld and The Office, and I can't get into television because it's just too much. There's so much. It's so overwhelming. But I do watch the Australian Open again, and the final is this weekend. So it's Yannick Sinner versus Zverev, and then for the men's, and then Sabalenka versus Keys for the women's, and that's a big thing because Sabalenka's number one. Keys is an American that took out the world number two last night, which was a big deal. So that's on this weekend. So if anybody wants to check that out, well, it'll be on ESPN.
Okay.
And we'll
Bye to the
we'll
people.
talk to people. We'll talk to people next week, and please leave us feedback and let us know what you'd like to hear from us.
Tell
Yes.
us all about your conversions, your religious conversions.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll see you next week.